The bell above the door at Ellen's bakery gave its usual quiet jingle, and only one person glanced up, a man standing near the register. Rachel Sutton pushed the pink box back across the counter before the young clerk could hand it over. "I need to cancel this," she said, her voice steady, even though the phone buzzing in her coat pocket hadn't stopped in 10 minutes. The clerk asked if something was wrong with the cake. Nothing was wrong with the cake. Rachel's hand shook as she signed the cancellation form, thanked no one in particular, and was gone before the door swung fully shut. Sam Reeves set down his coffee and walked to the counter. "This isn't the story yet. It only looks that way 5 minutes in. Stay through to the end before deciding who's really losing something here." Sam didn't know the woman's name. What he'd noticed was the shape of what he'd just seen. The rehearsed calm, the way she'd thanked the clerk as if canceling were routine, the way her hand trembled anyway. He asked Ellen, the owner, to put the order back through. Same cake, same name on the ticket, paid in full. He asked her not to say who'd done it. "Ellen didn't leave an address," said Ellen. "I'll get it to her," Sam told her. And he did, 20 minutes later, copied from the delivery slip the clerk hadn't yet thrown out. His son Jake waited outside on a bench, legs swinging, still in soccer cleats, narrating everything he saw. A dog across the street, a boat trailer backing in crooked, a man fumbling his keys into a storm drain. He listened the way he always did, half his attention on the boy, half of it somewhere else. They drove home to the house on Front Street, the one Sam had spent most of a year stripping wallpaper from, a house that still smelled like sawdust in every room. He'd bought it in cash the month after they'd moved to Wilmington and told the one neighbor who'd asked that he simply liked working with his hands. That much, at least, was true. What he didn't say was that a project needing this much work had been exactly the point. Something with a clean beginning and a clean end, unlike most of what he'd left behind in Charlotte. He made dinner while Jake did homework at the kitchen island, boxed mac and cheese because it was Thursday, and Thursday was mac and cheese night, a rule Jake had invented and Sam had never once broken. After Jake was in bed, Sam sat on the back porch with a beer he never finished, listening to the river 2 blocks away, thinking about a woman he'd exchanged maybe 4 words with and how long it had been since anything outside his own house had held his attention past dinner. Across town, Rachel walked into a kitchen that looked nothing like a home in crisis. Granite counters, a fridge calendar color-coded with her son's whole month. Ben thundered down the stairs asking about dinner. "Spaghetti," she told him, same as always, and didn't mention that she'd spent the afternoon on the phone with a bank representative who kept using the word hold as though it weren't a decision someone had made on purpose. The call had come that morning. Her trust distribution account was temporarily suspended pending internal review, no further detail given. She'd run the numbers twice before lunch and gotten the same answer both times. Enough in the company's operating accounts to stay steady. Nothing in her own name she could touch without trust approval. And a birthday 2 days off that suddenly felt like the one bill she couldn't cover. She fed Ben, checked his homework, and sat on the porch steps after he'd gone up, phone in her lap, a useless balance app open on the screen. At 7:40, a bakery van pulled up. The driver set a pink box on the porch, said it was already paid for, and left before she could ask by whom. Under the porch light, she opened it. Ben's cake, the same one she'd canceled that afternoon with her own signature. No card, no name. She stood there a long moment, the box balanced on one hand, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, let herself cry before first deciding whether she was allowed to. Upstairs, Ben's window stayed dark. He never learned any of it. Not the cancellation, not the call, not the tears on the porch. That had been the whole point. 3 days later, Rachel went back to the bakery, telling herself it was to settle the bill, though she already knew it had been paid. Ellen stood behind the counter, flour on her forearms, and when Rachel asked, carefully, as if unsure she wanted the answer, who had reordered the cake, Ellen hesitated only because she wasn't sure it was hers to tell. "Man comes in most mornings for coffee. Contractor, works on the old houses round here. Sam Reeves." She wiped her hands on her apron. Funny thing about him, I heard he used to run some big investment fund up in Charlotte. Real money. Now he's out here re-roofing porches for people half his age who couldn't have afforded him 10 years back. She shrugged, as if it were just gossip and not a door swinging open. People change, I guess. Lost his wife a couple years back from what I heard. Moved down here after. Keeps to himself mostly, except for that boy of his. Rachel didn't answer. She thanked Ellen, took the address of a job site 2 blocks over that Ellen volunteered before being asked, the way small towns hand out information nobody requested twice, and walked over with no idea what she'd say. She found him on a ladder, reframing a window on a house that clearly had been lovely once and was slowly becoming lovely again, board by board. Fresh cedar singles stacked on the lawn, a radio playing low from his truck cab, sawdust drifting through the morning light. He climbed down when he saw her at the base of the ladder, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You're the one who paid for the cake." Not a question.
"Ellen talks," Sam said. Not quite a confirmation, not quite a denial. "Why?" He took longer to answer than she expected. "Because a birthday shouldn't be the thing that gets canceled," he said finally, "whatever else is going on." She didn't ask what he meant, and he didn't explain. For a moment, neither spoke, and the silence between them felt less awkward than simply unfamiliar. 2 strangers standing where gratitude usually turns into small talk, except neither one reached for it. A truck rattled past somewhere behind her. A dog barked twice down the block and stopped. He turned to grab a level off his tailgate, and a business card slid loose from his open toolbox, landing face-up in the dirt between them. Rachel saw it first. Cream cardstock, softened at the corners, and unfamiliar logo, a name in small type beneath it. Harbor Bridge Capital, Samuel J. Reeves, founder. Sam picked it up without a word and tucked it back into the box. Rachel didn't ask, though she wanted to. She thanked him again, mentioned that Ben loved the cake, and walked back to her car carrying a question the whole way. What did a man who'd once run an investment fund want with a hammer and a stack of shingles? She had no answer, wasn't sure yet she was owed one, and something about not being owed one made her want it more. Behind her, Sam watched her go, then looked at the toolbox as though it had betrayed him. He hadn't shown that card to anyone in 2 years, hadn't meant to now. He buried it beneath the tape measure, climbed back up the ladder, and told himself it didn't matter that she'd seen it. He wasn't fully convinced by the time he reached the top rung. The following Tuesday, Gary Nolan called an emergency session of the Sutton Maritime Board. 9 seats around the table, Rachel at the head only because her father had sat there for 30 years before her. Gary stood rather than sat, the way he always did when he wanted the room to feel like a courtroom. "I want to be clear, this isn't personal," he said, which was usually how his most personal sentences began. He laid out numbers, a shipment delay back in March, a client account lost to a competitor in Charleston, a cash position he called concerning without ever saying to whom. He proposed a formal governance review, and within it, a suspension of the CEO's operational authority, and separately, a freeze on trust disbursements tied to her equity until the picture cleared. Rachel watched 3 board members nod slightly before she'd even finished responding, and understood in that instant that this had already been discussed in rooms she hadn't been invited into. She kept her voice level anyway, the way her father had taught her, arguing a losing point, slower, not louder. She argued the figures, the timeline. Carla Jennings, 2 seats down with a legal pad she hadn't written a word on, caught Rachel's eye for half a second, something careful and warning in it, then looked back down before anyone noticed. The board didn't vote that day. They scheduled the formal vote for 3 weeks out to allow a full review, which Rachel understood meant 3 weeks for Gary to build his case and 3 weeks for her to either find one of her own or lose the company her grandfather had started with a single leased tugboat back in 1951. She sat afterward in her car in the parking garage far longer than she meant to, her father's original partnership agreement open on the passenger seat, a document she kept in her glove box for reasons she couldn't have explained. Outside, the port carried on as it always did, cranes shifting containers beneath a sky indifferent to what had just happened 3 floors above it. Across town, Sam's phone rang while he was up on scaffolding, a name he hadn't heard in 2 years. Dean Ashby, who used to handle disclosure fillings for Harbor Bridge Capital back when Harbor Bridge Capital still existed. "Somebody mentioned your name in connection with the Sutton Maritime situation. Thought you'd want to know," people are still asking. "I'm not involved in that," Sam said, and meant it at the time. He climbed back up and didn't think of it again until that night, lying in bed listening to Jake breathe in the next room, when the name Sutton Maritime surfaced out of nowhere and refused to sink back down. He lay there working out why a company he had no stake in kept circling back to him, and arrived at only one honest answer, one he didn't much like for how simple it was. He got up once, quietly, and stood in the hallway outside Jake's room listening to him breathe, the way he still did most nights, though the boy had long since not needed it. Whatever he decided about Sutton Maritime, it would touch this house too, and Sam had promised himself 2 years ago that nothing from his old life would ever be allowed to do that again. Jake's class staged a spring program the following week, a loose set of songs and one very earnest recitation about the water cycle. Jake, with no adult coordination at all, had told his teacher his dad was coming. Ben had told his own mother the same. Somehow, both boys ended up seated 2 rows apart, their parents meeting by accident in the gymnasium doorway. "Small town," Sam said, by way of greeting, and Rachel nearly laughed for the first time in 3 weeks. They sat together because the good seats had run out, not because either had planned it, and for 40 minutes watched their sons perform with the mix of pride and second-hand embarrassment every parent knows. Ben forgot half his line about evaporation and recovered by inventing a better one on the spot. Sam laughed loud enough that Rachel glanced over, and something about the exchange felt easier than either had expected walking in. Afterward, in the parking lot, they talked. A real conversation, longer than either meant to let run, about the house Sam was restoring, about how long Ben had been begging for a dog, about a Saturday farmer's market neither had visited in months. It stayed light. Neither touched anything from the last 3 weeks. Rachel didn't ask what a man restoring porches used to do with an investment fund. Sam didn't ask what exactly a woman at the port actually ran. Reaching for the same gymnasium door at the same moment, their hands nearly brushed, and both pulled back half a second too fast, the kind of overcorrection that says more than contact would have. Neither mentioned it. Both thought about it the whole drive home. That night, after Ben was asleep, Rachel sat at the kitchen table and searched Harbor Bridge Capital. Most results were dead links and a handful of business journal archives, the kind that thin out when a company dissolves quietly instead of collapsing loudly. One line from an old Charlotte piece stayed with her longer than the rest. The founder had stepped back from daily operations following a personal loss with no confirmed timeline to return. She closed the laptop without reading further, some instinct telling her this wasn't information to go digging for through a stranger's obituary-adjacent business coverage. She kept thinking about it anyway, and noticed, brushing her teeth, that she was smiling about the gymnasium door and nothing else that had happened that day. Ben appeared in the bathroom doorway, in his pajamas, asking if Jake's dad would come to his game Saturday too. Rachel said she didn't know. Ben said he hoped so because Jake claimed his father used to play catcher in high school, and Ben wanted to see if it was true. She sent him to bed and lay awake longer than she meant to, replaying a version of the next 3 weeks that had almost nothing to do with the board vote at all. 2 weeks before the scheduled vote, Gary hosted what he called a community appreciation event under white tents on the dock. A band, more reporters than the occasion warranted. He'd invited half the investors on Sutton Maritime's cap table and made sure each one heard him say "stabilizing leadership" at least once, usually with a hand on someone's shoulder. Rachel had to speak with less than an hour's notice and no prepared remarks, and felt the whole room measuring her against a story Gary had been quietly writing about her for weeks. She kept it brief, thanked the port workers she could name, mentioned her grandfather's tugboat the way she always did when she needed the room to remember whose company this really was, and sat back down to applause that felt more like relief than enthusiasm, catching Gary watching her the entire time with an expression that didn't match his clapping hands. Sam was 200 yards down the dock, contracted to repair a stretch of rotting decking, close enough to hear most of it over his own saw. He watched Gary work the crowd table to table, and something in the back of his memory turned slowly, like a name trying to surface. It came to him at sundown, driving Jake home. Gary Nolan,
9 or 10 years back, a logistics roll-up out of Savannah that had come across Harbor Bridge's desk seeking a growth round. Sam had passed on it personally after his diligence team flagged inconsistencies in the receivables ledger that were never satisfactorily explained. The man pitching that deal carried a different title and a different company name on his card, but the same rehearsed warmth, the same habit of saying, "to be clear," right before something wasn't. Sam pulled over on the shoulder of Market Street, engine idling, and called Dean back. "That name you mentioned, Gary Nolan. I need you to look into something for me." Quietly. Jake, in the back seat, asked why they'd stopped. Sam said he just needed to make a call, and Jake went back to narrating boats on the river, the whole of what his son would ever know of any of it. Sam drove the rest of the way home, turning the same thought over. He'd built a quiet life on the belief that the man who used to sit across tables from people like Gary was someone he'd outgrown, someone he no longer needed to be for anyone. It had never once occurred to him that the skill wouldn't vanish just because he'd stopped using it. He pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and sat a moment before going in, porch light catching the dust still on his forearms. Dean called back 2 days later with a single line that told Sam everything he needed and nothing he wanted. Same forensic pattern as Savannah. Sam sat with that a long moment, then called Rachel's office and left a message asking her to call him back, no explanation given, and spent the rest of the evening deciding how much of the truth he was willing to hand a woman he'd known only a few weeks. Carla Jennings hadn't slept well in 11 days. On the 12th, she stopped fighting it. She met Rachel outside the office, in the lot of a diner 2 towns over, where nobody from Sutton Maritime would recognize either car, carrying a folder she'd kept in her bag since before the board meeting that started it all. "I should have shown you this a long time ago," Carla said. "I couldn't. There's a confidentiality clause in my contract. Gary drafted it himself. And I have 2 kids and a mortgage, and I told myself that was reason enough to stay quiet. It wasn't." Inside, a copy of the trust amendment Gary cited as grounds for the disbursement freeze, alongside a copy of the same document pulled from the trust's own archives, filed 4 years ago before a single signature had been altered. The difference wasn't subtle once you knew where to look. Her father's signature on Gary's version sat 2 millimeters higher than every other document he'd ever signed. The pen pressure too even, too clean, the kind of consistency that comes from software rather than a hand. "He didn't just freeze your money," Carla said quietly. "He forged the reason he was allowed to."
Rachel sat in her car a long while after Carla left, the folder open on her lap, crying in a way she hadn't since her father's funeral. Not from fear this time, but from the particular grief of realizing a dead man had never meant to leave her powerless, and someone had spent months making it look otherwise. She was still sitting there when Sam pulled up to collect Jake from the diner, where both boys had been dropped for grilled cheese. Through the open car window, while Carla and Rachel talked 2 tables over, he caught the tail end of it, enough to know something had broken loose, not enough to know what. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I know, but I think I might need to tell someone who knows how to read a forged signature." Sam was quiet a second too long. "I might know somebody." Something in his voice told her it wasn't a stranger he had in mind. For the first time since the toolbox and the business card, she let herself ask out loud, "Is it you, the somebody?" He didn't answer right away, and the not answering was its own kind of answer. Neither pushed further. In the parking lot, with 2 8-year-olds finishing grilled cheese 20 feet away, Carla was watching them from her own car, folder back in her bag, allowing herself something close to relief for the first time in 11 days. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be hers to carry alone anymore, and after months of being the only person at Sutton Maritime who knew the whole shape of it, that alone felt like the first full breath she'd taken in a long time. Over the following days, Dean Ashby worked the document the way he used to work fraud cases before leaving the industry for a quieter life, comparing signature pressure curves, tracing metadata buried in the digital scan Carla had pulled before Gary locked the file, cross-referencing dates against court records from the Savannah deal 9 years earlier, where the same forensic accountant had flagged nearly identical irregularities.
By week's end, Dean had a report Rachel's own lawyer said would hold up anywhere she needed it to. The board vote arrived on schedule, the way scheduled things do, whether or not the person who set them is ready. 9 members took their seats. Gary stood again, laying out his case for formalizing Rachel's suspension. He was 3 sentences in when the conference room door opened and a man in work boots, still faintly dusted with sawdust from a job he hadn't had time to change out of, walked to the front of the room. "My name is Samuel Reeves," he said. "Some of you may know me as the contractor working on the Whitaker place a few blocks from here. Fewer of you will know that before that, I founded and ran an investment fund called Harbor Bridge Capital, and that 9 years ago we declined to invest in a company," he nodded once toward Gary, "this man was raising capital for because our diligence team found signature and ledger irregularities we couldn't get a satisfactory explanation for. I have a forensic document examiner's report showing the same pattern in the trust amendment Mr. Nolan presented to this board 3 weeks ago." Rachel sat very still at the head of the table, watching a man she shared a gymnasium bench with become, in real time, someone she hadn't fully known she was standing beside. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The room was already turning toward him on its own, the way rooms turn toward anyone who walks in already certain of what he's about to say. One of the older board members, who'd served with Rachel's father for a decade, asked Sam directly why he was involving himself in a company he had no formal tie to. "Because I watched a woman cancel her son's birthday cake because someone made sure she couldn't afford it. And then I watched the same someone stand in a boardroom talking about stabilizing leadership. I don't have a stake in this company. I have an opinion about people who do that to families." Gary's objections came fast and shrank with each one. Who had let this man into a closed session? Nobody answered. The room asked for the report instead. Dean's findings passed hand to hand down the table in a silence broken only by turning pages and once the low sound of someone exhaling through their teeth. The vote wasn't close, 8-1. The board removed Gary Nolan from his position pending a full independent investigation and immediately restored Rachel's full authority and trust disbursements, effective that hour. Gary voted against his removal. Nobody else did. He gathered his folder and left without meeting anyone's eyes, and the room exhaled all at once, the way rooms do when something that had been pressing down for weeks finally lifts. Afterward, in the hallway, board members Rachel had known her whole life shook her hand as if meeting her for the first time, and in a way, they were. The woman who'd walked in that morning unsure she'd still have a company by lunch wasn't quite the one walking out of it now. Sam stood off near the elevators, apart from the congratulations, waiting to see if she'd want him closer. Gary left the building without a word to anyone, briefcase in hand, the kind of exit people make when they've already begun rehearsing how they'll describe it later to someone else. The week that followed moved fast, the way crises resolve once the truth finally has somewhere to land. An independent investigator was retained within 2 days. Gary's system access was cut by end of day. 2 clients who'd quietly begun exploring other shipping partners called Rachel personally to say they were staying, now that they understood what actually had been happening behind the numbers Gary had been showing them for months.
Rachel found Sam in the hallway outside the conference room, still in his work boots, looking like a man not entirely sure he'd done the right thing by walking in uninvited. "You could have told me," she said, not angry, just tired and honest. "I know." "Why didn't you?" He leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets. "After my wife died, I didn't want Jake growing up around what money does to people when there's enough of it. I didn't leave because I was ashamed of it. I left because I didn't like who I was becoming close to it." He looked at her. "I wasn't hiding from you specifically. I was just out of practice being that person. Some days I still am." She didn't answer right away. Then she reached over and took his hand, held it 3 or 4 seconds, no longer, and let go. "Thank you," she said, "for the cake and for this." "You'd have gotten there without me." "Maybe," Rachel said, "but I didn't have to do it alone. That's different, even if the ending's the same." Sam studied her a moment, the kind of look that wasn't measuring her so much as recalculating something about himself. "For what it's worth," he said, "I wasn't planning to stay involved past today. I figured I'd hand over Dean's report and go finish that window at the Whitaker place." "Are you going to?" Rachel asked. "Haven't decided yet," Sam said, and the honesty of that landed heavier than a firm answer either way would have. They stood there a while longer, neither filling the silence. Down the hall, Carla was already fielding calls from 2 reporters without missing a beat, the kind of competence Rachel made a mental note to reward properly once the dust settled. That night, Rachel sat on Ben's bed after his lights should have been off, and when he asked why she seemed happier than she had in weeks, she told him work had gotten a lot less complicated. He accepted it the way 8-year-olds accept most things adults tell them, and fell asleep without ever knowing anything had been wrong at all. The story made the local paper 2 days later, a short business section piece about a governance dispute resolved and a company moving forward under its founding family. Sam's name appeared once, in a single sentence, no photograph attached. He read it standing at his kitchen counter, coffee going cold beside him, and felt for the first time in 2 years that being seen hadn't cost him anything he wasn't willing to spend. 3 floors up, in an office fully hers again, Rachel found the pink bakery box, empty now, still on the shelf where she'd set it the night Sam's anonymous cake arrived. She hadn't been able to throw it away. Looking at it now, she wasn't sure she wanted to anymore. Sudden Maritime settled into its new rhythm. Over the following weeks, the board formalized Carla Jennings into a director-level compliance role, a promotion 3 years overdue that nobody objected to once the reasons became public. Gary's name came off the letterhead, the parking spot, and eventually, once the investigation closed, off the company altogether, the way names fade once the people attached to them stop mattering. Jake and Ben kept being friends the way kids do when nobody complicates it. Bikes, a shared obsession with a video game neither set of parents fully understood. Afternoons at the dock, watching Sam rebuild things. Fascinated the way boys are by power tools they aren't yet allowed to touch. Rachel started finding reasons to be at that dock, a coffee run that happened to pass by, a question about property lines that could have been a phone call, a stretch of new decking she claimed to want to see finished, though she kept coming back after it was done. Sam never asked why, and she never explained, and both seemed to understand that naming it aloud would somehow shrink it instead of growing it. One evening in early June, she stayed until the light over the Cape Fear River turned orange. Sitting on an overturned crate near where Sam was wrapping up for the day, the boys tossing a football behind them, their voices rising and fading with the wind off the water. "You ever think about going back to what you used to do?" Rachel asked. "Every now and then I watch Jake catch a ball and I don't think about it very long." He set his hammer on the crate beside her. "What about you? Ever think about walking away from all of it?" "Every now and then," Rachel said. "Then I remember my grandfather leased one tugboat with money he didn't have, and I figure I owe it more than one bad month." Sam picked the hammer back up, turning it once without using it. "For what it's worth, I don't regret walking into that boardroom. Thought I would. I don't." "Good," Rachel said, "because I wasn't going to let you take it back even if you did." That pulled a real laugh out of him, the first she'd heard that wasn't half swallowed or aimed at one of the boys, and it stayed with her the whole drive home, longer than she'd expected a sound like that to last. Neither said anything else. They didn't need to. They sat there until the sun was mostly down and the boys got hungry, and nobody spoke a word about what either of them was actually feeling. Somehow, that said more than if they had. Driving home, Ben asked from the back seat whether Sam and Jake would come to his birthday party, the one the company had insisted on redoing properly now that things had settled. Rachel said she'd ask. Ben said he hoped they'd say yes.
And Rachel, watching the road, realized she was hoping for exactly the same thing, for reasons that had stopped being entirely about her son somewhere along the way. Sutton Maritime threw Ben's birthday party 3 weeks later than it should have happened, and nobody minded once they saw what the company had put together. A full afternoon at the Marina Pavilion, string lights strung between the pilings, a spread of food that put the original bakery order to shame, half of Ben's class tearing across the June-hot lawn. Ellen came herself to set up the cake, waving off help until Sam showed up anyway and started moving tables without being asked, the two of them working side by side, the way people do when neither needs instructions. Carla arrived with her own 2 kids in tow, already laughing with a colleague near the drinks table, no confidentiality clause left to worry about. Rachel stood near the water with a paper cup of lemonade, watching Sam laugh at something Ellen said, watching Jake and Ben chase each other barefoot across the grass, and realized, without being able to say exactly when it had happened, that the distance she used to keep between herself and Sam Reeves had quietly closed over the last 2 months, board vote by board vote, doc visit by doc visit, without either of them ever announcing it. Carla found her by the water. "Staff has a theory about you two," she said. "I don't want to hear it," Rachel said, smiling anyway. "Didn't think you would." Carla bumped her shoulder lightly and went to referee an argument between the boys over a bag of water balloons someone shouldn't have brought. When it came time for the cake, both boys insisted on blowing out the candles together, which nobody had planned for and everybody allowed anyway. Sam came to stand beside Rachel to watch, close enough that his shoulder rested against hers, and this time neither of them moved away. "Good cake," Sam said, low enough that only she could hear. "You'd know," Rachel said. Jake wandered over with frosting on his chin, asking if he and Ben could ride the golf cart the marina staff used for equipment. Sam told him to ask the dockmaster first, and Jake ran off already asking before Sam finished the sentence. Across the pavilion, Ellen caught Rachel's eye and smiled the particular smile of someone who'd watched the whole thing unfold from behind a bakery counter weeks earlier, entirely unsurprised by where it had ended up. Neither Sam nor Rachel said anything else. They didn't need to. The first cake he'd ever bought was for a boy he'd never met, paid for and delivered with his name attached to nothing. This one he helped carry to the table himself, in daylight, in front of everyone, for a family that had, without either of them deciding it on purpose, become his too.